welcome back to another Deep Quote live from quarantine. I'm D.
And I'm Pod.
And today we're going to be discussing that unnameable monstrosity, the coronavirus, demonetized.
Oh, lovely. We're going to get a nice little banner at the bottom of the video.
Oh, darn.
It'll look almost like another comment. You know, adding an extra 50% to our average comments.
Oh, hi. You're hitting low blows here.
Yep.
So, yeah, we're going to be talking about the coronavirus, and the quote that we're choosing is the Chinese virus. So this is a quote from President Donald Trump. He referred to the coronavirus, specifically COVID-19, as the Chinese virus. And some people gloss that over as, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Some people are just losing their collective shit. Why?
I mean, I think that it's fair that people are offended because just like the sensitivity to anything that could be possibly perceived as racist is a lot higher.
Chinese people are not a race. Or you know, you could argue
it's a nationality that has
a distinct look.
Distinctive ethnicities within it. Like there's not just one group that is Chinese, there's multiple.
Sure. That they are genetically distinct to a degree. They can be differentiated from other nationalities. So saying it's a Chinese virus, would it be just as insensitive to say, the black virus, referring to something that, or referring to a disease that was first discovered in the black population? Actually, for example, Ebola.
I mean, it would be kind of insensitive to just be like, oh, it's the African virus, when it's like, no, it's Ebola and we do have a name for it,
sure.
So we should call it by that name.
Sure.
That said, like,
Ebola is largely an African virus, though.
Correct. But I was about to say, that said, there's been a push to like not even refer to COVID-19 as being like the Wuhan virus or the Wuhan flu, because the World Health Organization has been very strongly opposed to any kind of nationality or region of the world to be included in a name.
Sure.
Which is why like they're not happy with the naming of MERS, because that had Middle East in it. The Middle Eastern respiratory disease.
I think Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome.
Something like that.
Yeah, and I think the most notable example of this is the Spanish flu.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, with the Spanish flu, the reason it's called the Spanish flu is not because it originated in Spain, which is what most people think. The entire world got hit with the Spanish flu at approximately the same time, or at least by the time we realized what was going on, it was throughout the entire world. Most countries were pretending like nothing was wrong, I believe, because it was first discovered during the time of World War I, so they had bigger things to worry about.
Well, it's not that they had bigger things to worry about. They had bigger propaganda to worry about.
Right.
If they admitted to their enemy.
You didn't want to say, all of our people are dying.
Yeah, because if you say, hey, enemy, all of our people are dying, and it's mostly our soldier-aged people that are dying, and it's mostly the people in the trenches.
Mm-hmm.
That's not great.
And it's not good for morale.
Yeah, and if you don't know that they also have it, you might think that, oh, if I admit to it, then they're going to come stomp on me.
Mm-hmm. And the first country to actually say, hey, we have this massive flu epidemic going around was Spain. And then other countries jumped on that saying, oh, the Spanish have it. Well, we're starting to see it too.
Mm-hmm.
And started open up about it, but calling it the Spanish flu. And we don't look back on it as necessarily a blame game of the Spanish created this flu. It's the Spanish, or it's not Spain's fault, but the name stuck with it. And I think that's one of the reasons that the WHO, the World Health Organization, is trying to make sure that nations aren't included in names. So I can see it from that perspective of you don't want to unfairly assign blame to a disease that isn't the fault of the parent country. Now, in this case, does that apply?
I think it applies insofar as at the time that he referred to it as the Chinese flu, that there already was a commonly used name in the lexicon.
Sure.
So
the coronavirus,
yeah, the
COVID-19.
coronavirus, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
All of those would have been acceptable. I know that early on in the reporting, Wuhan flu was pretty common to see from news organizations
Because they
they didn't have a name.
And the first city that had a massive outbreak and was completely shut down was the city of Wuhan in China. So Wuhan flu used to be a way of referring to it. Also, the Chinese SARS virus, you could say that because it was only in China for an extended period of time.
Well, early on, they also didn't want to call it SARS, and they still don't want to because SARS has a much higher, or the original SARS has a much higher death rate, and they don't want to incite panic.
Right, but it is a type of SARS virus because SARS is sudden acute respiratory syndrome.
Correct.
Which is exactly what this is. It is.
Yep. Which is why the official actual name of the syndrome is SARS-CoV-2.
Yes.
But no one wants to say all of those words, and SARS is not quite correct because it's not the SARS.
It's easier to just say the corona or the coronavirus. So going back to, it used to be called, at least temporarily, the Wuhan virus. Some people have referred to it as the Chinese virus. Trump referred to it as the Chinese virus again because that's where it originated. And it's not just that, like in the instance of the Spanish flu, that the first to admit it were the Spanish. It seems to be very clear that this started, ground zero was in Wuhan. And in particular, the earliest case that was tracked back, as far as we know, was in Wuhan. And the location where the hotspot where it started was a meat market, unfortunately, about a block away from a viral research center that studies coronaviruses.
So there's totally not people making conspiracy theories out there.
Yep. And we're not here to be conspiracy
We're not going
theorists.
we're not going to comment on how much we do or do not believe those. Suffice it to say that we are aware of the location.
Right.
And are not intending to pass blame on any person.
And I think that the arguments that people are making against referring to it as the Chinese virus, or saying that is bad, is because it's taking a step backwards. That right now, the entire world is coming to a screeching halt. That basically every society in every country is agreeing we can't have gatherings of more than 10 people. We can't go to work unless it's absolutely necessary. Don't travel unless it's absolutely necessary. We're completely locking down our borders. No one from other countries can come in, with the exception of maybe freight, just harboring freight.
Yeah, I mean we're not completely shut down yet, and we're in the U.S.
Right.
But like to time ourselves here, we just shut down our border with Canada, so. It's only a matter of time.
This is one of the few episodes that we're recording immediately before putting up. That most of the time we'll have a backlog to make sure that if we can't meet a particular week or a particular day, that we can still post. This one we're actually just recording a day before putting it up. So things are actively screeching to a halt across the entire planet because of the dangers that this poses. And even if it's accurate to say this originated in China and referring to it as a Chinese virus in that regard, it basically says, yeah, it's not your fault, but you started it, and it's kind of pointing the finger.
Yeah, it does get very blamey, and the unfortunate thing is that just the way that this virus has been spreading, it's not a matter of if people are going to get infected. It was a matter of when, and it really didn't matter what China did. They bought us a lot of time, and we have to give them credit for that, even if it was at the detriment of their own society.
Although it sounds like that may have been on the order of the time that they bought us was maybe a few weeks.
I've but that's still time.
Sure, and I've heard stories of instances in the U.S. As early as back in January where people were showing or had symptoms and respiratory infections that exactly match that of the coronavirus. So, and the first case I think identified was November back in China.
That sounds about right.
So they took a lot of drastic measures, literally quarantining 50 million people to prevent the spread of the virus within the country and without. So, yes, they took a lot of measures, again, assuming that the Chinese Communist Party is to be believed, which is a really big if.
I will believe them in certain things. I will reserve judgment on other things and let history decide what is actually going on the ground right now.
Yep, I agree with that. And I think in terms of discussing the quote of the Chinese virus, it is accurate to say that it originated in China. At least everything we see says, yes, it originated in China. Right now, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to say, actually, the U.S. military developed the virus and then released it in Wuhan. So in that regard, the Chinese Communist Party is trying to say that the U.S. developed and intentionally released this. So President Trump saying this is a Chinese virus is honestly pulling a punch, going back, not even saying the Chinese virus that entered the public right next to a coronavirus research facility, or a research facility that researches at least partly researches coronaviruses. He didn't bring that up. He could have very much pushed a conspiracy of China developing this to, if you look at our
he could have called it a Chinese developed virus. He could have called it, the Chinese started virus. I think that he is technically correct. I think that him using...
Which is the best kind of correct.
Yeah. I think that him using that type of terminology is not helpful given the situation right now.
It is a power play.
It's a power play.
And it's a power play that China was pushing first. They've been reaching out to journalists across the world saying, stop, don't mention the fact that this started in China. In fact, we're trying to confirm that the U.S. military developed this and released it to make it look like it came from China. So they're actively trying to push that it was a purposeful American attack. So President Trump referring to the coronavirus as the Chinese virus is a jab back at China, and tensions have already been difficult.
I'm just wondering, not to go too far down the rabbit trail here of conspiracy theories, but what does China think that the U.S. would have to gain for releasing this kind of virus on the Chinese people?
I think that's a great question.
Like, is the goal like, oh, we need to move manufacturing back to the U.S., so let's just shut down China? Because that sounds like a harebrained idea, considering that manufacturing around the world at this point has been shut down. Not completely. Face masks, ventilators, things that we need for everyday life are still going strong, but... And
almost all of our medication comes from China.
Yeah. Like, good job if that's what happened.
Right.
You just shot yourself in the foot.
And also, who would stand to benefit from what this disease brings? And basically, this disease doesn't affect children at all.
It does affect some children. They're finding, but it's very limited. It's children that unfortunately would have succumbed to something else.
Right. And the young adults, even middle-aged adults, it generally doesn't affect that badly. And then as soon as you get into the aging population of 50, 60, 70, it's a 15 or 20% mortality rate. So it very much affects the elderly and hits them hard and suddenly, and it's very virulent and very easy to spread. And China right now is having a major population distribution crisis where they have too many old people because of the one-child policy and not enough young people to take care of them. So the country that would stand to benefit from this exact type of disease is China, not the U.S. releasing it in China, especially a virus that's virulent enough that it will get out of China and into the rest of the world. So again, bringing this back into the original argument of Trump saying the Chinese virus is a jab back at the Chinese Communist Chinese Communist Party's propaganda machine, trying to blame this on the U.S. He's trying to say, no, we didn't start this. I'm not saying that you did, but it originated in China. And in that regard, it's Trumpian politics. It's how Trump plays the game in terms of being tactically rough on his opponents.
Well, he also nicknames things, and he's well known for that. That If he knows that he has a particular jab he wants to make repeatedly, he just attaches the jab to the thing
Mm-hmm.
and be like, "Oh, Crooked Hillary." It's a great way.
Right.
If you're every time you refer to her, you just call her Crooked Hillary. People will remember that. I can't talk today.
You have the corona.
I do not. I just had allergies.
That sounds like an excuse to me.
It would have been, but the allergy meds kicked in, so I'm good.
Okay, good. So, and anyway, I think, again, going back to back and forth between pro and con, regardless of the rhetoric, referring to it as the Chinese virus in terms of its source, we know where it was first discovered, and that would be China. Whether or not that's relevant, I think, is yet to be determined. It will be relevant in determining how this came to be, what are the origins, and that is under investigation by all countries throughout the world, as well as trying to get a vaccine. And I think the argument from the WHO is adding a country to the label of the virus is not productive, because then it
stigmatizes people from that.
It stigmatizes it, and it disincentivizes those two countries to work together to combat the virus. And right now, the thing that we need is to come together as a worldwide species to figure out how to fight this disease, share that knowledge with each other, don't make fun of each other, be cooperative, and fix this. Because if you don't, you're going to lose 2% of the world population.
Yeah, and at least, and that's assuming that it holds off well enough that we have enough hospital beds.
Yeah, assuming that we don't overload the medical system, then about 2%, the average mortality rate seems to be balancing at around 2%.
2 to 3.5, depends
right,
on where you are.
That depends on the age distribution.
Yeah, and I think the other problem with attaching a location to it is that people not in that location may get a false sense of security. That like,
it's
that's
the Chinese
virus, so I don't have to worry about it here. And it's like, no, you have to worry about it. It's like
Absolutely.
If your crops are destroyed by Japanese beetles and you're like, but how did they get here? They're Japanese beetles. Like, great question. Ask the beetles. I don't know. They're going to do just as much damage.
If you are the Smith family and you have a farm, and down the road there's the Johnson family, and their fields light on fire, and then that fire spreads and it lights your fields on fire, and someone asks what's going on, it's like, well, the Johnson's field fire, you're referring to it as the Johnson's field fire. Sure, it started there. You can worry about that, of who's to blame of the loss of crops, later. Right now, your field is burning down. It doesn't matter where it started. Stop it.
Keep it away from your barn before all your cows become barbecue. Or you could just invite our friends over and eat the barbecue, but I think PETA would have something to say about that.
It would also be a little bit burned,
Yeah.
You wouldn't have a house to eat it in, so there are other problems. So I understand both sentiments, that the Chinese Communist Party is playing hardball against the US, Trump is trying to play hardball back, and that's how Trump does politics. And from on the other side of the coin, the WHO wants to make sure that that nations work together and are collaborating in this time so that we can actually save literally tens of millions of people. So
pointing fingers doesn't really matter when everyone is spiraling towards anarchy.
But politics doesn't completely disappear. Even in world-ending scenarios or world risk scenarios, politics still don't disappear.
Politics don't disappear, but for the most part, countries are kind of putting aside their differences, saying, hey, that thing we're fighting about, we'll worry about that later.
Let's put our other arguments aside. We'll come back to the fact that I really hate you and I want you all to die. We'll come back to that. But for right now, let's just kind of figure this thing out, because we're both dying, and both dying is not productive. Let's just make one of us die. So that's a pretty morbid perspective.
Yep.
There's one other thing that, just in case this video hasn't been forcibly removed or hidden, I want to say Whinnie the flu. I think that's my favorite reference, favorite way of referring to this, besides the corona, calling it Whinnie the flu.
Also, if you're listening to this and haven't been completely turned off by all of the discussions of the coronavirus, go wash your hands now. Just do it. It's pretty good practice. And don't beat anyone up for a roll of toilet paper. Spring is coming. Leaves are going to be starting to appear on trees. And you know what? It's just not worth it to get into a fist fight in the middle of Costco, okay?
Also, you won't need toilet paper if you didn't buy food. Food is the more important thing.
Oh, food wrappers also great.
Yeah.
If you have to.
And also, in your mailbox, there's constantly these things delivered called newspapers that most people just throw in the trash. That's what people used to use before toilet paper. So you can use newspapers as toilet paper.
Just make sure to throw it out instead of putting it in your septic system.
Good advice.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a septic system, don't just flush it. I think that's it. Be safe, everyone. Be healthy. Be careful. Watch out for Whinnie the flu. And we'll see you guys next time.
Hi everyone! Thanks so much for listening to this discussion. Your interest really means a lot to us. If you want to help support this podcast and our goal of sparking discussions and bringing people together, check out how to contribute in the description. Happy deeping!
The content of this podcast does not reflect the views and opinions held by anyone involved. We will frequently be playing the devil's advocate strictly for the purpose of exploration of ideas and not as an endorsement of any subsequent action. We condemn all acts of violence other than those of self-defense against physical harm.